Hello and welcome to another episode of the Soul of Business with Blaine Bartlett. I am your host, Blaine Bartlett, and we've got a reprise, or yeah, I guess a reprise is the word I'd use here. A guest coming back on today, and I'm excited about this. Last time we talked to Dan Frechtling, he's the CEO of Boltive. We started going down a conversational rabbit hole that was very fruitful. And I was frustrated because we didn't have enough time in the 30-minute window that I'm working with here to actually explore some of the other stuff that I know that Dan can bring some light to. And I also think that it is going to be phenomenally interesting to those of you that are listening that are concerned about just kind of the qualitative security of what goes on with your computers, your phones, your electronic communication modalities. So just real quick on Boltive. Boltive is one of the probably one of the premier organizations today working with data security, particularly privacy in the I'm going to just euphemistically and very generally say the ad space, because everybody's getting advertising. You click on something on Amazon, all of a sudden you're being inundated with all kinds of tracking ads that say, you looked at those pair of shoes, have you thought about these? And all that kind of other stuff. And I know that every now and then will get a pop-up that's saying, you might want to check the security of your system. And it's kind of like, here, kitty, kitty. Yeah, click here, let's see where we go. So I want to welcome Dan back. And Dan, your episode, just so you know, is getting quite a bit of traction. And as we're having this conversation right now, that episode just went up on September 12th. So I'm just real pleased to kind of see the traction we're getting on that.
Yeah.
So I usually don't have somebody back so quickly, but what we talked about last time was so compelling that I couldn't not say, come on back. So welcome, Dan Frechtling, CEO of Boltive.
Yeah, Blaine, it's great to be here. Thanks for having me back. And I appreciate you squeezing me in amongst all your global travels, because you had quite a bit of late.
Yeah, it's been busy. All of a sudden, the floodgates have kind of opened up here, which is kind of cool. I mean, I've got a lot of really cool stuff. For those of you that are listening, you can go to my website and pick up more about that. Because there's going to be some information that you're going to want to have about different products and programs and offerings that are going to be available to you. But that's on a completely different bandwidth and a completely different topic. Right now, I want to talk about something that you kind of mentioned in passing, but I didn't get a chance to go into depth with. And it's the whole subject of malware, viruses and that sort of stuff that accompany and are concomitant with this whole thing around the advertising ecosystem. So I'm going to just kind of give you your head on this, and we'll see where we end up going.
Yeah. So I think there's an entire sphere of malicious attacks that come through advertising, to the point that the term malvertising was coined, which is like a portmanteau of malicious and advertising, a combination of those two words. And what typically happens is you go to a legitimate publisher site and the content is safe, but the ads are not safe. And your computer can be infected by the ads because they're like little back doors into publisher websites where anything can go. And as a user, it can often be hard to tell the difference between what's an ad and what's content. And even if you can tell the difference, the ads can harm you even without clicking on ads. So
really, even without clicking on them?
Yes. Yeah. The code can execute behavior behind the scenes on your machine. And you might have experienced this. When I say machine, device, it can be your phone, it can be your laptop. You may have experienced when you're on an app or you're on a website and then something takes over your whole screen. And it could be the example like you're talking about, which is telling you you're infected. The other scams that are saying you're the 5 billionth web searcher and you've won a prize. There's all kinds of scams that use that kind of approach to it. And those are some of the more lighthearted ones. It can get a lot more serious than that when we look into ransomware and Trojans and things like that. But I like your introduction here, Blaine, because we talked a lot about privacy last time, but that's just one of the 4 forms of invasive media that Boltive has been in business to help stop. And the others are malware, offensive ads, which there's just patently offensive content, and then there's situationally offensive content, and then heavy ads that can slow down your machine, consume a lot of memory. Those are the 4 types that we're in business to stop.
Mm-hmm. The title of this podcast is The Soul of Business. So I'm interested, just your take, Dan, on the malicious intent. And I'm not necessarily talking injurious intent, but malicious intent, the sneakiness of some of these ads. Where do they fit within the ecosystem of the soul of business, in the notion that the purpose of business is to uplift the experience of being alive on this planet? It almost seems antithetical. And prima facie, when I look at it, it is antithetical. But is there a place for this?
Well, it's like many things. Human beings can justify about anything that they do with some greater good. And there are regions of the world, and there are certain governments that justify malicious activity in the self-interest that they espouse. And so in the way that you've coined it, and you have propagated it, Blaine, I think it's a soulless activity completely. Mm-hmm. In the justification of those who are acting it out, there is a greater good, and sometimes that greater good is just monetary enrichment. There are lots of ways to make money in this world. One of the fastest ways to make money, if you have a computer coding background and you live in a certain part of the world, is to join the dark side. And so it's more attractive economically. It's more attractive from a rising standard of living standpoint, because there aren't alternatives, unfortunately, or the alternatives don't pay as well. So anybody can justify anything, right? And we're just in that storm with invasive advertising.
Yeah, anybody can justify anything. That's one of the things that you talk about, and you can actually riff on this, I think, fairly well, just given your position and Boltive's position in the industry. What are some tips to keep people safe that you might be able to offer up here?
Yeah. So we normally work with businesses, but there are things that consumers can do to protect themselves too. And I'm going to categorize them probably as extreme measures and then more tame measures. The extreme measures, right, is to never click on ads, which, as I said a moment ago, doesn't completely save you from malicious intent, but it does a good job. The other is to install ad blockers, and we can talk about ad blockers in a minute and what they are. And but these sorts of things to shut off advertising, it's a little bit like cutting off your nose to spite your face. And it's certainly the publishers, the media companies would say so, because by denying them revenue, they need to produce content for you, or for you and me, right? When you don't provide the monetization through your eyeballs, it's going to cost somewhere else. And the cost could be the publisher going out of business. So I'm not going to champion either of those ideas. But there are other things you can do that are more reasonable, more tame. And number one is to keep your browser updated with patches, which is just a good security practice and a good privacy practice anyway. It can be hard, right, to keep everything updated. And it's not just your browser, it's your phone, it's your operating system, all of these things. Another one, which is a neat little trick, is if you see an ad that's suspicious, hover over it with your mouse and see where's the URL that it's directing to. And does that look like it's consistent with the product? The same tool, by the way, the same technique can be used with email when you look at who's that sender, right? Yep. And you see where is that, because you can spoof senders and you can spoof domains is the same way. But hovering over the ad is another technique. And another one is, which marketers aren't going to love, but is to Google the product. You see an ad for something, rather than clicking on it, Google the product, then that will take you to the legitimate site as opposed to taking a chance on being redirected. But one other thing I would say, Blaine, is that companies like Boltive and our Ad Lightning product have massive troves and really large block lists. So we know most of the bad actors that have ever existed, but there's always new ones, and consumers can report ads. So many vendors like Boltive, like our Ad Lightning product, have a report ad feature underneath the creative, and that helps publishers and vendors such as ours analyze them and remove them.
Yeah, the idea of being proactive, in this context, rather than being a victim of circumstance, and the key word there is being a victim. Just that word itself presupposes I have no agency. It wasn't me. And the lack of the lack of control that comes with that. The idea of data security and being responsible for that as a user, cookies. I mean, I've always got cookies coming up, when I go to a fresh website or something like this, and there is a move towards a cookieless future.
Yes.
And I know the value of cookies, from a tracking perspective and from efficiency, from a browser utility perspective. What's the impact on data privacy when we move more and more and more towards a cookieless future?
So I would say it's uncertain. It's sort of the known problem and the unknown problem. Like we're getting rid of something that was really kind of used past its sell-by date, right?
Yeah.
So I think if you go back historically and you look at where did cookies come from? And I don't believe we talked about this in the last episode.
No, we didn't. No.
Okay, yeah. So the first cookie actually came out in 1994. And there was an engineer at Netscape, remember Netscape? And
I remember Netscape. Yeah.
And they were well-meaning, and they wanted to remember visitors, for example, who had put items in a shopping cart. So that's a really good utility. That's 1994. 1 year later, in 1995, the first tracker was created by an engineer at DoubleClick who realized, hey, these cookies can be used in a third-party sense to follow people around the web. And so the idea of cookies and web experience has been intertwined since the beginning. It's taken us 20 years to unwind that, but we are unwinding that right now after 2 delays from Google. Originally, we were going to be done with cookies this year, then it was delayed to next year. Now it's being delayed to the end of 2024. But there's certainly cookieless alternatives out there to be tested. The problem is we know cookies are bad for privacy. We don't know if certain identity solutions are good for privacy or not that are seeking to replace cookies. And on the other extreme, we don't know if contextual marketing or contextual advertising, which is a privacy by design type marketing tool, we don't know if that's going to be as effective and what that will do to the online marketing space, which will then start to look more like magazines. So in a cookieless world, we know what we're getting rid of. It's sort of the devil we know, but it's the devils that we don't know that will fall into that void because marketers need to target and publishers need to monetize. So there's lots of room for skirting around and crossing the lines there.
Yeah, that Faustian bargain, monetization for free content. I mean, and that's what the advertising supports.
Yeah. And
in order for that engine to work or that business model to work, data has to be shared. So that ends up becoming really interesting when we start looking at some of the data privacy regulations that are, I mean, we got Zuckerberg testifying before Congress. We got Google's executives in front of Congress right now. They Silicon Valley doesn't know where they're how they're using your data. I mean, it's just it goes into this black hole. So we've got this alphabet soup of data privacy laws around the world, GDPR in CPRA, CCPA. I mean, you just kind of throw an acronym up there. The U.S. is behind on this right now. California is trying to do some stuff. Some of the individual states are trying to do some things, but it's still a hodgepodge. Is there as you look in the future, is there something that you see, and this is a fortune telling moment
Yeah.
here, but is there something that you see on the horizon that suggests that there may be a one size fits all data privacy piece that is on the horizon?
Well, we used to hope so. About 4-6 weeks ago, we hoped so. It was called the ADPPA. I love your term, alphabet soup, because these are very odd acronyms. The ADPPA, which was proposed before the August recess, and it had a shot of making it to the House. The greater House was introduced out of committee in the House, but making it to the broader House for voting. It didn't make it before the August recess. The next entry point, the next kind of opportunity for it was before the midterms, and it's unlikely that's going to happen. And the reason is that it's a decent law. I think most privacy practitioners, experts give it a B+, which is very high for Congress, for the federal lawmakers. That's very high, right? Because it has a lot of civil rights protections, and it has a private right of action, which means consumers can bring lawsuits in certain situations. There's sensitive data protections. However, California got there first, and there's a very strong political weight coming out of California. And there's also Nancy Pelosi, who has a lot of power, right? Number 3 in line in leadership of this country. And she has said she's not going to bring it to a vote because it doesn't have all the protections that California's CCPA does. So there was some hope and belief, and there still is a little bit, that the ADPPA could make its way back. But the real sticking point is whether it is a ceiling or a floor. And a ceiling means, right? A ceiling means it preempts all the state laws. It becomes the law of the land. And a floor means it's a starting point, and states can build on top of that. And there's a tremendous amount of debate on the industry side. Chambers of commerce, business organizations, they want it to be a ceiling because they want a consistent, like you said, one law of the land, right? And but at the state level, there's just too many differences for the states to go along and allow that. So that short answer to your question, we don't have it in the US. That means GDPR out of Europe still is really the reigning authority, because that tends to be what global companies solve for.
Yeah, it's interesting. I'm not a big player at all, and I have to be GDPR compliant because I've got clients literally from all over the world that give me information. So that has been a very interesting hoop for me to jump through. And in finding somebody in this country, for a small business to be able to navigate the compliance structures of GDPR has been very interesting. And I'd like to touch on that. We're going to take a real quick break, but the cost to business, where's the offset? And there is a cost of doing business, and part of it, and I want to explore this, the consumer trust is offsetted by, what I'm doing as a business and managing my revenue stream, my expenses. So all of that gets really interesting here. So we're going to take a real quick break. We're talking to the CEO of one of the best, and I say that one of the best data privacy firms on the planet today, Dan Frechtling, out of the Boltive organization, CEO of Boltive. So we'll be right back. I want to thank you for listening. I want to also invite you right now to go to blainebartlett.com. And on that site, which is my personal website, you'll see services up on the top menu. I'd like you to click on Leadership Mastermind. Now, why I want you to do that is we have structured a mastermind program that is very unusual, and it is very powerful. And by going onto that site and clicking that link, you'll be taken to a landing page that is an invitation to join this mastermind. It's a 52-week-long exploration of what it takes to be a highly effective leader in today's fast-changing environment. You won't regret it. And if you've been liking what you've been listening to on these Soul of Business podcasts, how does one become a leader that can keep connection to the soul of business. That's what we look at. That's what we're about in this mastermind program. So again, go to blainebartlett.com and click on the services link, and there you'll find the link to the Leadership Mastermind program. Look forward to seeing you there. Thanks for listening to this little commercial, and now back to our show. Welcome back, folks. Before Dan and I took a little break here, I had posited that there is a cost to doing business around this ad privacy or this privacy and security issue when it comes to data that gets accumulated by businesses. And I mentioned, I'm not a large organization at all, but I've got businesses all, literally all over the planet. I don't think there's, except for Antarctica, there's not a continent I don't do business on. Penguins don't have email addresses. But that being said, there is a cost to complying with, and in this case, it's going to be GDPR because it seems to be the major one that anybody that has an international presence has to pay attention to. Where does that cost get mitigated, or how does that cost get mitigated from your perspective as you're looking at this?
Yeah, that's a really broad and a good question. So there's an ongoing trade-off between convenience and data privacy. And I will give you an example of that trade-off, because somewhere we have to draw the line, and the line has been shifting. Take Facebook, for example. It used to be that Facebook logins, when you visited other websites, were a big convenience, that you didn't have to create a new account at every website you went to. There was a little login with Facebook option that stored your credentials and used that, and that became your login to that particular site. Well, because of various reasons, including Facebook's troubles with personal data, with Frances Haugen, the whistleblower, with iOS, it's been under attack, and it's fairly or unfairly been identified as playing fast and loose with privacy. So those logins that you used to see more frequently are now no longer on the sites of Dell Computer and several other companies, Twitch from Amazon, Ford Motor Company, and there's about a dozen that I saw in a recent article. The point being that in the protection of users' data privacy, Facebook doesn't show up as a single login anymore. That's one cost. That if you were used to using your Facebook login, now you can't do so anymore. You've got to do something else, create another login, try to use Google or one of the other unified identity solutions. But you're asking something I think it's a little bit different than that, which is how do you pay for the cost of the privacy compliance? And it's a hard question to answer, because we went for 2 decades to the extreme of data sharing without consent. So we're used to an environment where the cost of data is really low and the ability to act on that data was virtually unregulated. It was the Wild West of the internet. So that's what we've gotten used to. The reality is, now that we've swung back a little bit to normalcy, is that you can't do those things. Consumers get upset about them. And if you do those things, we're at the point of no return. Consumers get a vote now as to whether they're sharing their data. Which is an interesting point. Who owns the data? Who owns the data? Who owns the data? Right. It's the consumers. And there's schemes that have arisen where consumers can share their data. They can. So one which I thought was really clever is that you can request to delete your information, and you could request delete your information from companies that are under California law. So you can go to Facebook and go to Google and ask to delete your information. Well, there's companies that will then turn around and then sell that back to those companies and see how much they'll pay for it. So there's a way of how does this get paid for? It's the consumer gets the money in those cases. That's not widely adopted, of course. So by and large, the cost is borne by businesses. Just like any other tax has to be borne, just like any other regulation or rule needs to be borne, right? Workplace safety has a cost, but we would argue that workplace safety is a necessity, that we wouldn't complain about that. Privacy is going to be in the same category, that it is a necessity and there is a cost for it. But companies like Boltive reduce that cost because we automate things that used to be manual to make sure you're doing the right thing.
Yeah, that's kind of where I wanted to go, just as a shameless plug for Boltive, because you have actually set this up so that it is probably about as frictionless as it could be. If my understanding of your engine is correct here, and some of the product offerings that you have, it's as a business, I mean, it's basically plug and play in a lot of ways. Now, I don't want to oversimplify it, but that's essentially my experience of what you're saying around it.
Yes, it's a scanning solution for privacy,
Yeah.
and we have a scanning and blocking solution for invasive ads. And so the way the technology works is our scanners will visit your site. You don't have to do anything, and we will observe what's going on, and we'll report back when there's errors. And there's enough fidelity and specificity and forensics in what we report back that companies can take action to make sure that consumers aren't being defrauded or consumers' data is not being abused. And that's the scanning solution. So it's even kind of, I'd say, faster than plug and play because it's codeless. A company doesn't have to do anything. However, we also have a blocking solution, which is a line of code that goes on websites. And that's an extra protection because where scanning tells you the problem, blocking solves the problem. And our blocking solution will stop bad ads before they render and replace them with good ads. So publishers don't lose the opportunity to monetize that ad slot. Consumers don't have the negative experience of viewing the malicious ad, and everything happens in milliseconds. So it's unobservable to the human eye.
So if I'm, say, a medium-sized box retailer here, and I'm selling product, but I'm also subsidizing, the cost of doing business by hosting ads. What I'm hearing you say is that you've got a line of code that I can insert on my website, on the platform, on the sales page or wherever it's at, that will automatically check the ads that have been, that people are paying to actually host on my site. And if it's spurious, malicious, it's going to kick it out, and there's another opportunity for somebody else that's more of a legitimate player to come in.
That's correct. And this is important because there's various technologies out there that will purport to do the same thing. But as a publisher, you need a proactive solution. You don't want just one defense. So it's borrowing from the cybersecurity principle of defense in depth, of having multiple protections against the same problem. So we have features like the real-time blocking script that I described to you, and that's driven off of our deny list, which is a real-time engine that has an updated list of the threats. And the threats are different signatures that we can see in ads. It can be the domain name, it can be other aspects within that code. And so when we see that signature come along, it gets blocked again in a few milliseconds. So no one is threatened by that. And a third method is then the dynamic threat analysis, where we'll load and execute scripts. We'll take it in a protected environment, like a subset of impressions, and we'll catch those patterns as well, because sometimes there's novel threats that we need to watch out for.
That's beautiful. Now, I want to talk a little bit about browsers. I mean, there's two things here. One is the opt-in, opt-out. Previously, opt-in was considered to be the default. It wasn't even questioned. But now, with GDPR and ADPPA and the other, opt-out is assumed to be, the default. And unless you want in, you're not going to get in, sort of a thing, as far as data.
I'd say, just to interject, that's true for GDPR. That's true for GDPR. In the U.S. laws, it's still largely an opt-out regimen, although the ADPPA has a clause in there. It may have been struck in the latest draft, where for children's information, it's an opt-in. I think that may have been stricken, but GDPR definitely has and just be clear about what we're saying. In the laws today, the opt-out standard in regulatory standpoint means the user has the election to opt out, but the default is they're already opted in. Whereas an opt-in standard is the default under GDPR, the user is opted out. And when they allow you as an advertiser to send ads to them, that's considered an opt-in. Yeah.
And that's how we've structured our website. So when somebody comes in order for them to sign up for the mail list, it's an opt-in, piece. I mean, they can get whatever they want, but to get emails from me, they've got to opt in. It's not just going to be automatic. That's sort of the thing. Browsers are interesting. I mean, we've got a plethora of browsers, and you mentioned Netscape, early on in the conversation here. And I remember wrestling with that a long time ago. And then there was the browser wars between Netscape and Explorer. But there are all kinds of different choices here, and I'm bringing this into the conversation here today for the listeners, because the default doesn't have to be Chrome. The default doesn't have to be Safari. If you're concerned about security, now, these browsers are all ramping up their security protocols, but something like Tor, what does a browser like Tor actually come into play in this ecosphere?
Sure, yeah. So the Tor is actually, I think, properly classified as a VPN, a virtual private network, and it has the Onion browser, if I'm calling it, or it has the Tor browser. Actually, you are correct. It started out as a VPN. It does have the Tor browser that's wrapped into the whole product. You're correct. I was mistaken, but that is bundled together. So a browser like Tor does sort of belt and suspenders kind of solution. The other browsers that do similar things like Brave or Ghostery Dawn or even Firefox don't have the VPN necessarily associated with them the way Tor does, but they achieve the same thing, which is to cover your tracks, to keep you anonymous on the web to an extent. And Tor goes a step further with what they do around IP addresses.
But that anonymity, going all the way back to where we started here, that anonymity will not necessarily protect me from malicious adware.
No, it won't, because the malicious, the invasive advertising doesn't need to know who you are as an individual. It just needs to know how to reach you, right?
Yeah, that's the point I wanted to get into play here, because I've talked to some folks who are going, well, I'm literally Tor came up in the conversation. I'm using Tor so I don't have to worry about malware. And I'm like, I don't think that's accurate. I don't think that's accurate. So it's good to get a definitive answer on that.
Yeah, there is more ways to protect yourselves, as we talked about before, but even I think sometimes there are short measures that we misinterpret as protections, and you just gave one example of them. Another example is the difference between identification and individuation, which is a very important concept in privacy, that you don't need to know somebody's name, address, personal information to have the same privacy violations that that we see every day. So identification is tying the attributes of someone to an identifiable contact. Individuation is being able to pick somebody out from a crowd. You may not know their name and you may not know any address about them, but you can treat them, you can manipulate them differently, even without their personal contact information. So I hear sometimes saying, well, this is anonymized, or this is de-identified. We use de-identification measures, and so we keep users safe. Well, that's not really true, because bad actors can exploit people if they know your fears, your likes, your politics. We've seen that from the January 6th situation to influence from foreign governments on elections. You just need to have a group of attributes of who is receptive to certain beliefs, and then you can foment a lot of disorder from that.
See, that okay, we may end up scheduling another conversation here, but that opens up this whole political conversation about targeting. And they don't have to know my name. They don't even have to know necessarily, my mailing address or anything else, just the demographic profile.
Yeah.
And that gets, that shows up in my browsing profile. And I mean, there's a lot of ways that gets identified, I'm assuming.
Yeah, it's because the architecture of everything we're talking about is all programmatic, and it's programmatic advertising. It's been called things like surveillance marketing, and when it's used to the extreme, but programmatic advertising is the world we're in now from the world we started. And the world we started was when ads were sold with insertion orders, and you just bought a bunch of space and you ran something, but over time, more and more pieces were automated. And the good news is it's all self-serve. There's no people in the middle, highly efficient, 10 to 50 milliseconds that these auctions for our attention occur. But it also creates lots of openings for all kinds of fraudsters and all kinds of malvertisers that sneak through.
Malvertisers. There's a word I was hoping I'd never run into. And you used the word here. Portmanteau. The
Yeah.
combination of two words.
Yep.
I've got to find a sentence to use that in. I love words that are unique, that actually capture something. Portmanteau. I've actually written that down and marked it out.
Well, and what's amazing about I even checked out, where does the word portmanteau come from? It's actually an old suitcase. You may know this, but it's the old handle suitcases where you used to open it up, right? And it was two hemispheres equally sized. You put clothes in both sides and you closed it, right? We don't use that anymore. We use rollers. We use, today's modern luggage. But portmanteau, which was on the outs, no one was going to use that word anymore because the suitcases were gone, has now become the word when we smash two things together and create something new out of it.
That's hey, recycle.
Yeah, that's right. It is sustainable.
Ecologically sound here. Folks, we've been listening to Dan Frechtling, the CEO of Boltive. Dan, you're a wealth of information, and not only that, I just enjoy the conversation.
Likewise.
You're erudite, you're sharp, you bring some information in, and that it's easily digestible and understandable. So I really want to thank you for agreeing to come back on the show. This is a treat for me, and I hope it's a treat for the listeners. So
it's a treat for me because I have a lot of fun. You make connections very quickly, Blaine, between things, and can move from topic to topic and somehow get everything covered in 30 minutes. So you're masterful at your synchronizing of these programs. I love listening to your podcast.
I'm a trained professional. Don't try this at home. Okay. You've been listening to The Soul of Business with Blaine Bartlett. I am your host, Blaine Bartlett. Check out my website, blainebartlett.com. It is safe and secure. All of that good kind of stuff. I will not advertise to you unnecessarily. And there's a lot of stuff up there. And folks, you can snoop around. I've got some, most of my IP is available. So take advantage of it. And the podcast is available. Those of you that are listening to it at all the regular channels. If you want a video of the podcast, the videos are made available on my YouTube channel under the Soul of Business podcast. So feel free to subscribe, and I'll see you on the next episode. Take care and be a center of distribution, not a center of accumulation. That's how nature works. It makes life go round a lot easier. Take care.